Mas Dédé, Dr. Oetomo, if you'll allow me to introduce you. I am so unbelievably and beyond thrilled to have you here as our speaker for our annual Coughlin lecture series in the year 2023. Yes, I'm so incredibly happy about this. Thank you for agreeing to be here at a somewhat early time of the day for you.
6 a.m. It's all right. We start the day early here in Indonesia.
That is very good to hear. Now, I don't want to take too long introducing you because you will take the lead, and we all know that people are here to listen to you speak, not me, but still, I would like to introduce you for those members of the audience who might not be that familiar with you or with your work. So for those of you who might not be in the know, Dédé Oetomo has been described by some as the godfather of the Indonesian LGBTQI movement. He is among many other things, social scientist, HIV/AIDS activist, a role model for generations of young Indonesians and activists and scholars in Indonesia and far beyond. For his work as a human rights activist, Dédé was honored in 1998, if I'm not mistaken, by the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission with the Felipa de Souza Award. And Dédé, as he might share with us, was born in 1953 to a Chinese-Indonesian family in Pasuruan, a cosmopolitan city in East Java known for its sugar refineries, just 4 years after Indonesia's independence from the Netherlands, which coincidentally is where I am from. He attended a Catholic school, but was not raised in a religious family, in my understanding. At the age of 20, and to their consternation and possible confusion, Dédé came out to his parents as gay. With a multicultural background and a talent for languages, Dédé studied English language teaching and then began postgraduate work in linguistics and Southeast Asian studies. In 1978, he was accepted at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, after being awarded a grant by the Ford Foundation. He received a second grant in 1984 to work with the Modern Indonesia Project at Cornell. He received his PhD in linguistics and Southeast Asian studies at Cornell University in 1984 as well. And as a student and teacher of linguistics, Dédé is the author of Beginning Indonesian Through Self-Instruction, of which I have and studied carefully part 1 and part 2 and part 3. Thank you for that, Dédé. The time he spent at Cornell not only shaped his intellectual interests, but also his more personal ones. And that meant devouring books about homosexuality, attending meetings and discussions, and joining the gay groups on campus. He published a number of personal essays anonymously in Indonesian magazines, in which he expressed pride in his sexuality. Dédé has had an immeasurable impact on the LGBTQI+ movement in Indonesia. Lambda Indonesia, a gay support group, was started by Dédé in 1982. I believe while he was still at Cornell. And it started as a newsletter providing a forum where people could write letters to receive advice about gay issues. It was the first one of its kind, I believe, in Indonesia, and one of the very first gay organizations in Asia. Lambda as an organization was discontinued in 1986, but soon after this, Dédé founded Gaya Nusantara in 1987. And the main aim of this organization is to make Indonesia a just society in which all people can live freely and equally before the law. It publishes, I think, still a monthly magazine, offers workshops on things like human rights, HIV/AIDS prevention and care, gender identity and sexuality, and advises and supports LGBTQI+ people. Its members used to gather at Dédé's house in the city of Surabaya, and I think they might still do so, but we might hear more about that.
Okay.
Now, there are currently well over 100 LGBTQI+ organizations in Indonesia. However, the country's LGBTQI+ people have also been facing increasing repression. Over, well, at least the past 20 years, Indonesia has seen a change towards increasing stigmatization, discrimination, and criminalization, especially for transgender and gender nonconforming person. Conservative politicians are proposing anti-LGBTQI propaganda. Some politicians have claimed LGBTQ people to be against human rights. homosexual acts, as they're sometimes called, are still punishable by law in a few conservative parts of the country. And in this context, Dédé has been critical of funding groups such as the Ford Foundation, UNDP, and USAID for not doing more for LGBTQI+ rights in Indonesia. And I think as of 2019, Dédé has admitted that hard-fought freedoms were being eroded as part of a broader shift towards conservatism. Now, among all these things, activist activities, scholarly work, Dédé has also stood for election several times, representing the People's Democratic Party. He has also applied to run the National Commission of Human Rights. I don't think that you were ultimately elected for these.
No, Parliament didn't like me.
Well, it is their loss. In 2010, Oetomo and the feminist activist Suci Martin established the first journal on sexuality in Indonesia, Gandrung, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Now, you will tell us more about this, but I think you're currently chairing the Regional Advisory Group of the Asia-Pacific Coalition on Male Sexual Health, and you're also a member of the Advisory Council of the Coalition on Sexual and Bodily Rights in Muslim Societies. And besides all of this, among all of this, you're also an adjunct lecturer in gender and sexuality at the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences and the Faculty of Humanities at Universitas Airlangga. I'm going to leave it at this. Again, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar. I'm very honored to be invited by Sylvia, whom I met, I think we met in 2018, didn't we, Sylvia, in Leiden, didn't we? Which was at a seminar on 20 years at a time of reformasi, of the democratization of Indonesia. I mean, I'll try to speak as briefly as possible, hopefully 45 minutes at the max, so that we could have a discussion afterwards, because there's a lot to discuss. And Sylvia, thank you for doing your homework and to do the introduction, because that actually provided the timeline, so to speak, of what I'm going to share with you this evening or this morning from my time. A few revisions. I'm no longer chair of the regional advisory group of APCOM as of end of 2021. Somebody else has actually replaced me. I was in that position for almost 9 years. I think that's enough. But it was a very good experience. Also with unfortunately CSBR, the Coalition for Sexual and Bodily Rights in Muslim Societies, has become rather small. Although if people are interested, we could talk about this in the Q&A later. They are actually at the moment, as we are speaking, running an online course on Islam, gender, and sexuality. But I still, you know, okay, here is what it is. CSBR is still hosted by Gaya Nusantara, my organization. So we still sort of, you know, support it. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to get proper funding for other activities than, you know, online activities. So and also we stopped, unfortunately, publishing the magazine in 2014 because, you know, social media was taking over, and so we're not very active on social media. And I'm happy to share that, as Sylvia said, there's 100 or so organizations all over Indonesia, and many of them are very productive in publishing zines, as they call it these days, books even, and it's amazing. There's actually an upcoming online course in Indonesian on Islam, sexualitas, and gender, or something like that, and with actual queer Muslims, Indonesian Muslims. They do exist. And some of them can be called like at least young clerics. So if you speak Indonesian, do register. Yeah, unfortunately it's in Indonesian, but you know, CSBR runs the English sort of counterpart. Anyway, so thank you again for joining this event. So on this occasion, I would like to share with you all my experience in the last half century or so. It's been a while. Initially to make sense of my own different gender sexuality, then to come out almost immediately into activism, which Sylvia described on the Cornell campus. Then to come out almost and finally until now to combine being an activist and an academic. I would like to think that throughout the journey, I have mostly succeeded in making sense of both my own self and the world around me for this occasion in terms of gender sexuality, but arguably also in terms of its intersectionality with other aspects of life. But first, let me give you a background to the custom in my family with regard to knowledge, and we can discuss this later. I mean, and probably shed some light on why is it so. My mother, and to a lesser extent, my father and maternal grandmother, the three important people in my early life, were children of the 20th century, so-called children of modernity. None of them were religious and certainly did not believe much in spirits and ghosts. To give one example, my mother once forbade me from believing in ghosts under big trees in dark places. In a rather racist and classist way, she said it was the belief of the indigenous servants. We are ethnic Chinese, I think Sylvia mentioned that, often seen as foreign, but also positioned under Dutch colonialism as foreign Orientals, a class between the European colonizers and the indigenous population. Whenever we argued about certain facts in my family, we would always refer to reference works such as dictionaries, grammar books, atlases, and encyclopedias. Seniority did not matter, but my grandmother, despite her minimal elementary education, I think she only had 4 years of elementary education in Dutch, she read a lot, so she was almost never wrong about things. So it didn't matter, the seniority didn't matter. In other words, scientific knowledge reigns supreme in my family. If you can refer to science, then it's the truth. When I entered puberty, it was in the mid-1960s, I started feeling different from my male friends. They were flirting with girls in the all-girl Catholic school in our hometown, Pasuruan. We were in the newly opened all-boy Catholic school, and I was totally uninterested. One evening, my father called me to his bedroom and talked to me about keeping hygiene in my private parts, and about wet dreams in which I would, he said, I would fantasize about women. I was honestly scared because I did not, dream about women, but didn't say anything. At about the same time, I read an article in Liberty, a popular magazine my family subscribed to, about homosexualitas, and I immediately connected my romantic and sexual feelings with it. I cannot remember whether the tone of the article was just descriptive, positive, or negative, but it did add to my fear at being different. Significantly, thus started my engagement with knowledge building through the written word, popular or academic, and later also with lived experiences in the queer communities I socialized and did research in. In high school, I began to develop a keen interest in learning languages, both foreign and local ethnic languages, though it was clear from the start that English would be foremost. I had always had a good reading habit, devouring just about anything written. However, in terms of my gender sexuality, there was nothing to read at the time. The lessons in biology and health education in high school were cisgender heteronormative in a binary way. In religious lessons and the catechism class I took, I was actually seriously considering being baptized as Catholic at the time. Once in a while, the friar, who was also our headmaster, made negative comments about homosexuality. I suppose being the headmaster of an all-boys school, he was aware of the possibility of homosexual relations in our school. There was also gossip about one of our math teachers, and the tone with which my schoolmates did so, in addition to the discourse I described just now, certainly discouraged me from trying to find a way of accepting my sexuality. When I went to college, I decided to major in English language teaching. My proficiency in English improved significantly, and I read more books in English. Around this time, when I was about in my late teens and early 20s, I did feel the urge to know more about my different sexuality. So whenever I went to the bookstores, I would buy the few books on sexuality that were available those days. I remember two books in particular. One is entitled Advice to Men, and the other is Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex, asterisk, but were afraid to ask. The latter seemed to be a very popular mass market paperback. Both of them were homophobic, so reading them was little help. And around the same time, I learned from a woman classmate that she was taking her niece to a psychologist in town. By this time, I was in Surabaya, where I am now. I finally picked up my courage to come out to her and asked her to introduce me to him. Fortunately, all he did when I came to his practice was to get me to talk with him about my feelings, and more importantly, lend me books on sexuality from his personal library. So, thankfully, there was no conversion therapy, no electric shocks. At least he was not that backward. I can't remember the titles, but I vaguely remember there was one which reported a sex survey of some kind in the United Kingdom. It did not make an impression on me. Meanwhile, my English reached a level where I felt confident reading more advanced texts. So I took a subscription to the Asian edition of Time magazine. I enjoyed reading the weekly issues. When I received the 8th of September 1975 issue, I still remember the date, though the cover of the Asian edition did not show it, the contents was largely the same as the US edition. It had a multiple-page coverage of the case of Air Force Sergeant Leonard Matlovich, who responded to gay psychiatrist Frank Kameni's call for a gay serviceman who was ready to challenge the ban on homosexuality serving in the US military. This was in the 70s, long before Don't Ask, Don't Tell even. More importantly, the Matlovich story was accompanied by page after page of description of the American Psychiatric Association's verdict that homosexuality is no longer a mental disorder, the dynamics of gay life in the US, the gay liberation movement, including the fight for equality before the law. So it was an eye-opener. It was an exciting epiphany for me. So I was still not ready to come out. However, I went to see my psychologist less and less frequently. One thing for sure, speaking with him reduced the anxiety I had had before. I actually became more outgoing and started putting on more fashionable clothes. I used to look so drab. My mother had to remind me, don't look so drab. Around the same time, I started teaching English at a US-Indonesia Friendship Institute called the Lembaga Indonesia Amerika in Surabaya. The director of course's wife, Mary Thulis, whom you might know as the producer of The Americans and Law and Order, my connection to Hollywood, was a PhD candidate in drama at UC Berkeley. She staged a few plays involving us teachers, other expats, and members of the local Indonesian community. I acted in Arms and the Man by Bernard Shaw and Fiddler on the Roof. Halfway, when we rehearsed, we were like, oops, this is about Jewish people. Are we safe in Indonesia? We were safe. We even had an encore performance one night. And also at a Christmas play for pupils of the Surabaya International School, where I was the only Indonesian. The other actors were all expats. In mid-1975, I won an essay competition organized by Japan Airlines. Together with a few dozen other students from Southeast Asia and Hong Kong, I went to Tokyo to study for 5 weeks at Sophia University, which is a Jesuit university in Tokyo. I said this because this is significant, because before that, I think I'm going to explain it later. The two experiences boosted my confidence and also caused me to have a few crushes. Well, I'm human. Coupled with the new knowledge I gained from the Time magazine spread, I was slowly and rather hesitantly considering finally acting on my sexual and romantic impulses. I mentioned the Japan scholarship because that turned me sort of towards Asia. I mean, you know, as a westernized Chinese Indonesian person, we knew more about Holland than about China, which is actually, well, kind of terrible, actually. Now I realize. So the Japan trip actually turned me to look east, so to speak, you know, to look into Asia. One day in 1977, as I was browsing the books displayed at the Narain bookstore, one of the bookstores I frequented in Surabaya, a book caught my attention. The title was, I still remember, Homosexual Behavior Among Males, a Cross-Cultural and Cross-Species Investigation by somebody called Wainwright Churchill. First published in 1967, the book summarizes the biological and anthropological research that had been done until then, basically arguing that homosexuality was just another variation of human characteristics. This reinforced what I had learned from the Time magazine article in a more in-depth and academic way. I began to let my hair down. No, I did not come out to anyone yet, but I did not refrain from talking about diverse genders and sexualities in class or when socializing with my friends and schoolmates. It so happened that, you know, in our drama class, we actually did what is Edward Albee's Zoo Story, and that's about two homosexuals, right? But I was saying, oh, I'm not going to say anything, but yeah, this is nice. In 1978, I was successful in applying for admission to Cornell University to do graduate work in linguistics with a teaching assistantship in Indonesian. Part of the assistantship was that book that Sylvia showed. It's like 40 years ago. They still use it, apparently. I departed with a hope to live as a gay man in the US. It took me 1.5 years to pluck up my courage to come out to everyone at the end of 1979. I finally did. The trigger, true to my custom of engaging with reading materials, was the gay liberation booklet published by the Quakers. So, you know, bless them. Unfortunately, I do not remember its title anymore. If you do, please let me know. I'll look for a PDF or something. At Cornell, I majored in linguistics with minors in sociolinguistics and Southeast Asian studies. Since I went to Japan in the summer of 1975, my attention has expanded from just Indonesia in a general way, rather superficial actually, and the West due to my family's personalization, as I did say that, and the dominance of orientation among many educated Indonesians, to wider Asia. The Southeast Asian Studies minor was also almost a natural choice given Cornell's prominent Southeast Asia program at the time and the Eccles collection on Southeast Asia, which is just, you know, I mean, of course, it's second to Leiden in classical and old materials, but in terms of modern materials, it was probably at the same level at that time, and probably still is actually. And also because I plan to write my thesis on the language and identity of the Chinese in my hometown. When I came out, it was the winter's intersession, so I had plenty of free time. I went to the library and devoured just about any book available in the library on homosexuality and gay liberation. There was a whole shelf. There was a whole shelf of them. I still remember the Library of Congress call number, HQ 76. I think it's still the same. Probably now it's like 3 shelves or something. These books reinforce my conviction that gender sexual diversity is merely part of human variation. Now I had learned about variation when I was first exposed to sociolinguistics in my undergraduate study in Indonesia, in Malang. So I see Mas Joe Errington's name here. Hello, Mas Joe. I taught him Indonesian, advanced Indonesian in Malang. So nice to connect with you again. So sociolinguistics was a major basis. Joe raised hand. Hello, Mas. Or Mas in Japanese is like, you know, brother or something. Yeah, that is brother. So So I first learned about sociolinguistics in Malang. So it was a major basis of my understanding of variation, first language variation. But it's not so difficult to shift it to gender and sexual variation. In addition, modern linguistics gave me a good grounding in egalitarianism. I mean, the slogan that all languages are equally adequate. I think still held by linguists. I mean, as linguists. And sociolinguistics sharpened my eyes and ears to leave no stones unturned when looking at society and language, which would later be useful when I started joining the communities in the street corners and parks of Indonesia. At that time, I also had an extra job from Audrey Cahin. I believe she's still in Ithaca, one of the editors of the Indonesia Journal, to compile a bibliography of modern Indonesian literature in English translation to be published in the journal. So between AQ 76 and the Echoes collection, I spent most waking hours in the library. And well, probably at University of Virginia is the same. Library opens until midnight, so I'm there almost until midnight. Without even trying, when I looked up translations of Indonesian poetry, prose, or drama in magazines and journals, I would find articles or references to gender sexual diversity in the cultures of the Malay archipelago and elsewhere in Southeast Asia, as well as other parts of Asia. I remember coming across an article on ritual transvestism, it was called at the time, in Southeast Asia, by somebody, I think it was a Eurasian, Justus van der Kroef. I believe he's right-wing in his politics, but hey, it doesn't matter, which opened my eyes to the rich diversity of gender identities, expressions in the region, and their sacred ritualistic functions. Now, of course, we know, from the work of people like Shane Graham Davies about the 5 genders in Bugis culture. If you're interested, we could discuss that later. Another fact I remember clearly was a mention in 2 14th century court annals of the Majapahit Empire, Nagara Kertagama and Pararaton, of their greatest king, Hayam Wuruk or Raja Sanagara, that's his kind of Sanskrit title, dancing in female clothing in front of his ministers. Imagine President Biden in drag dancing in front of the U.S. cabinet, or Jokowi doing that. I don't think they do it these days, but His Majesty Hayam Wuruk did that. At the same time, Professor Benedict Anderson, who had been a long time an avid student of Southeast Asia, knowing that I was coming out and also was doing these things, shared with me his files on gender sexual diversity in the Malay archipelago. Card catalogs, catalog cards, index cards, photocopies, a whole box of it. I remember at one point he was trying to convince me that all my enamoration with gay liberation was probably unnecessary given the rich tradition of gender sexual diversity in the Malay archipelago. We had our arguments. Unfortunately, I lost my copies of the letters that we wrote to each other because I was, by then in 1982, I was already in Indonesia doing research for my thesis. But being a good teacher, he let me make my mistakes and continued to provide me with materials about the deep roots of gender and sexual diversity in the region. We made peace at the end. So when I published my collection of essays that Sylvia mentioned earlier, he actually wrote a very nice introduction and appreciated my work, which is nice, coming from your teacher. My activism started by being a member of the gay group on campus called Gay People at Cornell. It's a bit boring, but it used to be called Cornell Gay Liberation. Before that, for those of you who are interested in history, it was called the Student Homophile League, formed under the tutelage of Father Daniel Berrigan, a Jesuit who used, when he was alive, he used to tie himself to nuclear warheads and got arrested. So he's quite a radical priest. But he was the chaplain on the Cornell campus at the time, and he protected the first group. So, but soon I also started writing articles and letters to the editor in Indonesian media. I had started writing when I was a student already, and before that, translating articles. So that came in handy. The editors kindly forwarded letters from their readers. Now, I found this not so in other Asian countries, but in Indonesia those days, the letters to the editor were so almost sacred. It's from the readers. You have to publish it, and sometimes the editors got into trouble because it will be from an ex-political prisoner or something, and whoops. So the editors kindly forwarded letters from their readers, and these people became the seeds of the Indonesian gay movement, as it were. I corresponded with them and gave and received many ideas which would later become useful for our movement. In the fall 1980 term, during homecoming, I hosted 2 gay alumni from New York City. One of them, Bob Roth, who unfortunately passed away because of complications of HIV/AIDS in the 80s, gave me ideas about putting my correspondents in touch with one another. So, if you write from Solo and there's another one from Solo, you offer it to them, would you like to know the other person from Solo? And in many cases, they said, oh yeah, of course, this now, of course, is taken by the likes of Tinder and, MeetChat and those dating apps. But I didn't have the entrepreneurship to think of that. So I didn't become a billionaire. It doesn't matter. He also gave me a mailing list of Asians that he had been corresponding with. This was amazing. I also found in the Cornell Library or in the office of GayPAC magazines like The Advocate, which I believe is still around, probably online, and The Body Politic from Canada. I had learned about the North American movement from books I checked out at the library. The magazine articles provided updates on the contemporary situation. Somewhat later, I found a radical feminist bookstore that sold gay magazines and other literature downtown in Ithaca. So I would go there regularly, and and I would buy books and magazines. Also, when I went to the big cities like New York, Boston, and San Francisco, it was always a joy to find these books. And so to sum up, my initial readings provided me with a reinforcement of gender sexual diversity as part of human variation, an understanding of the richness of such diversity in the Malay Archipelago, the strategies of fighting for equal rights, as well as achieving well-being, and also an international perspective. These have colored my activism. So you could see that up to this point, I was a nerd, basically. I was bookish. I was a homebound person, but it would change at this point. So in the summer of 1981, I was involved in a project writing the Indonesian textbook that Sylvia kindly showed. It was led by my professor, John Wolf, who's still around in Ithaca. And I needed to be with him and work with assistants in Salatiga, Central Java. I don't know, Sylvia, have you been there? He was also coordinating the Advanced Indonesia Abroad program. This is the program that Mas Jo joined in Malang in 1977 of the Consortium for the Teaching of Indonesian, COTI, hosted by Satya Wacana Christian University in the town. By the way, Satya Wacana's Faculty of Theology is quite progressive and humanist. So they're not against discussing LGBTIQ plus people and faith. In a good way, in an embracing, inclusive way. On the sidelines of my work, I was able to socialize in the Gaya and Waria. I'll just use Waria. It is quite complex. If you're really interested, there is a free book from Cornell University Press by Benjamin Hegarty called The Made Up State, which is being translated for those of you who know Indonesian as Negara Dendong. So it's basically the state in drag. I don't know if it will be banned in Florida or Texas, but I don't know. I'm sorry for being cynical, especially so I was able to socialize in the Gaya and Waria. To make it easy, I'll just translate them as trans women communities, especially in Surabaya, East Java. One of my uncles Yeah, okay, good. Thank you, Sylvia. So that it's free, downloadable from the Cornell University Press website. One of my uncles, Basuki Sujatmiko, was the deputy chief editor of that popular magazine that I mentioned earlier, Liberty, and he knew the local trans association, Parwakos. How nerdy is it? How not nerdy is that? You know, I mean, I have to be guided by three trans leaders to enter the community in Surabaya. I went with three Parwakos leaders, the association, which still exists, to the gay and waria hangouts, which were around the corner from each other those days. Interestingly, the gay hangout was actually in the front yard, no gates at the time. They were probably too poor, of two of the best high schools in town. So it's like at night, of course. I was reminded of the waria, whom I sort of grew up with in society and performing arts. To me, they were different from gay men. I knew they were different, but you know, my parents would take me to performances of Ludruk. If you know East Java, there is a folk theater performance called Ludruk, where those days, at least, the female roles were, you know, played by men or by trans women. And you know, my mother wouldn't bat an eyelid and would take me to performances and would, in the morning, would discuss, you know, who was the most pretty, who was the prettiest of all those women, and you know, not once of being afraid of that I would actually turn out trans. I mean, I didn't, and you know, I went to drag a few times, and my friend Abby, who's now in Bali, I don't know if Abby is in this webinar. So, oh, you look ugly, so that stopped me. If she hadn't said that, I would probably now join RuPaul drag race. Bang. Well, you can be an older drag queen, no? More importantly, I was able to meet people who responded enthusiastically to my idea of setting up a gay organization. Now, we have to note, and this is important because I'm talking to mostly an American audience, that Waria had started organizing in the late 1960s. This is in Ben Hegarty's book, at around the same time as Stonewall, but of course differently. So I sometimes say, if Indonesia were a superpower, an imperial power, probably, you know, Himpunan Wadam Jakarta would be the cry, and well, together maybe with Stonewall. Of course, you know, we're always on the periphery until now. And my meeting with the Parwakos leaders gave me further ideas about organizing gay men and lesbians. On March the 1st, 1982, we finally declared Lambda Indonesia. From its name, you can see it was clearly inspired by the movement in North America, but already with high sensitivity to local cultures and conditions, thanks to Professor Anderson's files that he shared with me, and also from my readings. We sent press releases to the international gay press, the Advocate, Body Politic, you know, Gay Community News in Australia, and also to Indonesian media. They were mostly published, almost in full sometimes, and received positive responses. No bullying, no homophobic responses at all on those days. This is how Indonesia has changed. On March, the summer after that, I received an SSRC grant, Social Science Research Council, a US Social Science Research Council grant, to carry out my dissertation research on language and identity among the Chinese of Pasuruan, my hometown, for a year. At the same time, I had time to explore the gay and waria communities more and continue organizing. So, you know, thank you, SSRC, for providing the opportunity. I quickly learned of the complex dynamics between sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Now we have these terms, yes, SOGI. And of course, you know, you could add SC as well for sex characteristics. Those days, these constructs were not so clearly identified and formulated. It did not help that many gay men like waria preferred to have sex or part with real men. I still hear that now. Meaning cisgender heterosexual men. And then people who are naive said, but how can they have sex with men? They're not gay, are they? Well, that's the complexity. which we could discuss later if you want to. Some would go into drag at parties. This is some gay men would go into drag at parties and playfully call themselves banci, the self-derogatory term for waria. This again is mentioned by Ben Hegarty in his book, The Development from Banci, Wadam, Waria, and then now Transpuan, and so on. When they noticed that I was attracted to other gay men, they told me, sometimes playfully, but at other times seriously, that they were disgusting, or we were disgusting, or they were disgusted by it. This is when I learned firsthand about behavior, orientation, and identity, which I actually learned later from Gitarao Gupta. I don't know where she is now, but she used to be based in DC, in Washington, DC, with the Sexual and Reproductive Health Rights Organization. When I referred to my understanding of the same phenomena in ethno-linguistic studies, it did make sense. Yeah, so you know, the difference between behavior, orientation, and identity. I'll explain later if you're interested in the Q&A. One of my first academic articles was a description of this complex interrelation between gender identity and sexual orientation in Indonesia. It was for a conference at University of Washington, hosted by Laurie Sears and Dan Lev. But well, the background is in 1990, there was the Year of Indonesia, and Indonesia is trying to get known. So, you know, nice cultural, you know, performances, seminars, and everything. But there's of course gaps, and so there are 4 seminars there were 4 conferences that were held to fill the gaps. One on the Chinese at the Cornell campus in 1990, and another one on gender and sexuality at the University of Washington. Then another one on Timor-Leste. Ooh, God forbid, huh? You cannot discuss. And another one, I believe, now the Timor-Leste, I cannot remember where it was hosted, probably at Yale. And then there is another one on the environment, which was also a gap in the gala of 1990. I was fully aware that it is different from the constructions in the West. Those days, whenever I mentioned transvestites, the word transgender did not exist yet to translate waria. People in the West reacted with friendly disbelief or total dismissiveness. You know, we don't understand that. So everybody was gay those days. And the word queer was not even used. This was in the 80s. This inseparable dynamic relationship between gender and sexuality is why recently, thanks to Ben Hegarty, I welcomed. I was referred to an article by Kaji Amin. I still don't know where he's based actually, but indeed we should combine the 2 constructs and just use gender hyphen as sexuality. So you notice that I mean it's something new for me. I haven't even told people in my organization. And that came to be because I was asked to write for the Fashriff of a friend at Gajah Mada University. So you might know him actually, Pak Muhajir Darwin, you do know him, who's retiring this year. And for the Fashriff, they asked me to write about non-binary genders. Isn't that amazing? So you know, Indonesia has the retrograde, whatever, the recessive democratization, but also it has you know, some silver lining. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In 1982, I met my first longtime partner, Rudy Mustafa, Maduri's man from Surabaya, in the Surabaya gay community. He's someone we can call street smart in many ways. I was the nerd, he was a street smart person, and introduced me to life in the street corners and parks, where I was able to observe directly the complexities of gender and sexuality. He was very good at socializing with different segments of the gay and waria communities, and since I was almost always with him when we hung out on Thursday and Saturday evenings, I learned quite a lot about the lived realities. Now, I don't know, there's those of you, maybe you yourself, Sylvia, there's something about Thursday evening, the eve of the Friday, the holiest day in the Muslim week. For some reason, ghosts would come out. Of course, my mother would say, no, no, you don't believe in ghosts. But also, waria and gay men would come out and actually hang out. And Surabaya used to have a waria show on Thursday evening, all openly, and with a sign announced in the evening newspaper. So that that's how Indonesia has changed. Now, of course, you don't even. I mean, it will probably be closed by the police. I mean, so in the meantime, Rudy and I revived Lambda Indonesia, which was floundering after about 4 years, by setting up Gaya Nusantara, which still exists now. We had our event last night, the poetry book discussion. Our main activity was publishing a zine. Being a nerd, and close to the written word, publish a zine, or in those days we would call a magazine. The organization is still active, and we are proud to say that we help other folks organize around Indonesia, the 100 or so that Sylvia mentioned, and at the national, even regional level. So so you could our social media is more active than the website. The more I hung out in the communities, the more I noticed the diversity of gender identities or non-identities, gender expressions, and sexual orientations. To begin with, not everyone identifies as something with a name. This is important. The male partners of waria and some of the men who had sex with gay men did not label themselves as anything but men. Yeah, not even straight men, they were just men, laki-laki. Waria did not always have a feminine gender expression. Now, this is of course confusing even now. I am aware of the very lively, at least, to say, debate on transgender people in the United States, which is sometimes a bit extreme. But some were outright masculine gestures and versions of femininity. Why can't you be masculine waria? They sometimes call themselves waria tomboy. Now, don't ask them, why don't you just be boys? It's like, no. This is where I learned that, you respect people's choice in, identifying themselves as trans. And then in terms of gender expression, still masculine. I think I learned about the academic discourse about such fluidity and diversity first at an Asia Pacific Regional Queer Conference at Sydney University in 1995, probably one of the first regionally, and later similar gatherings. My point is that I became aware of the phenomena from direct exposure first, and only later learned about their theoretical significance. You can accuse me of being lazy, or you don't read enough. True, but I was in linguistics. Rapidly shifting towards gender sexuality studies. In 1990-1991, because the first person with HIV was discovered in one of the brothels areas in Surabaya, Doli, there was like a moral panic. So because I had been active writing about the prospect of an HIV/AIDS epidemic in Indonesia in the media starting in the 80s, I was invited to join a research team surveying the gay and waria sides of sex industry in the Surabaya area. Sylvia, I would correct you. Ford Foundation has actually, withdrawn from this, mostly at government pressure. So not even sexual and reproductive health and rights programs. Ford Foundation, UNDP had to cancel a program in 2016 called Being LGBTI in Asia. I think it still exists in other Asian countries, rather small though. But USAID had always been, what should I say? Supportive of these, and I'm happy to share that in my organization and some other queer organizations are still receiving money from your taxpayers' money from the State Department. So I mean, don't tell. They don't dare to put it on the website of the State Department website, because that would Foreign Ministry is going to call the U.S. ambassador. Yeah. So I was invited to join this research team. It was funded by USAID. I discovered more complex dynamics and monetary transactions were involved, because the research was on the sex industry in the Surabaya. I was preparing for an HIV/AIDS program, which unfortunately, when it happened, it could not by government pressure or by some health ministry official, pressure. Oh, how many homosexuals are there? The usual rhetoric. It did not include gay men and waria when it happened. So anyway, I discovered more complex dynamics and was even further drawn into a way of thinking, which later I would learn was named queer. I think queer only came up in the 90s. I mean, but when I was doing it, I mean, I knew the word queer as something negative. Yeah, but now, of course, queer is, I wouldn't be surprised if there are university curricula that would use, the word queer in queer theory, there's even queer theology, of course, yeah, which the other day I actually introduced the term and concept and some literature through the rector of a Catholic seminary on the island of Flores. So, Sylvia, you're going to be in Cuba. You'll be meeting my comrades and our allies, our pastor allies there. Okay. I better hurry because we're almost at 7 actually. In many ways, it was good that I was invited to join a short course in sexuality research methodology later for Asia in 1994, but funded by the Ford Foundation. This was Ford Foundation in the 90s, very active, very cutting edge. I was able to learn directly from the gurus, John Gagnon, Carol Vance, Richard Parker, Michael Tan, Peter Aggleton. Of course, there are now people like Ben Haggerty, and probably you yourself, Sylvia, these days, the younger experts. This was my only formal training in the study of sexuality, just 10 days or something. Because of my academic position, I was also able to test my ideas with students in the undergraduate course on sexual behavior. It was called Perilaku Sex. I was asked to teach at Universitas Erlangga, where I had taught since 1984. People say it's a phenomenon in itself that as an openly gay man, I could teach formally as a civil servant at a state university. When I quit, it was not because I was gay, because I joined a political party. My approach was certainly not only behavioristic. I only have about a few paragraphs to deliver. In the 2000 decade, there were 2 initiatives to coordinate sexuality institutes. I think Sylvia mentioned this also. For civil society activists, academics, journalists, and government officials in Asia, patterned after the Summer Institute at the University of Amsterdam, which is a whole summer. Given my activist and academic positions, I was involved in both of them. I was happy to join the initiative since I believe that one of the important ways to change society's attitudes towards women and gender sexual minorities, as well as the fulfillment of sexual and reproductive rights and health, was through scientific knowledge and education. Soon, my own organization started organizing similar institutes for Indonesian participants, given in Indonesian. The regional institutes were not accessible to people who are not proficient in English. We experimented with different formats and lengths, as well as approaches, and we kind of still do it right now. And other organizations, like I mentioned, there is a queer Muslim organization called IKAMA. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's probably Islamic queer something in English. So they're doing this course online. For example, in the Indonesian context, we strongly realize that faith issues are very important. This is where faith came in. So in the past decade or so, we have worked with progressive humanist faith leaders in Islam and Christianity. We haven't been able to, I'm not criticizing them, but we haven't been able to reach out to the Hindus and Buddhists and Baha'is and the few Jews in Manado. There is a Jewish community in Manado. Yeah, with a proper synagogue, with support from Israel. Well, don't tell too many people. So, we have worked with these faith leaders to educate activists about diversity and gender sexuality and how there are progressive humanist interpretations of the holy texts and doctrine. By the way, I don't think my friend Diego Garcia is here at this webinar, but there's an upcoming book coming, I think published by, unfortunately, Routledge. Oh, am I allowed to say this? It's expensive, but it's on. I'll share it with you later. I'll share the title with you, Sylvia, because it was just so new. It was just last night, but it's actually Diego's dissertation on being queer and Muslim in Indonesia. It is possible. It is possible. Not in Aceh, maybe, but elsewhere is possible. In conclusion, by being both an activist and an academic, I've been able to work in the gender sexual minority movement through knowledge production and knowledge contestation. In many ways, for me, this started as a personal journey to create a safe space to be different. I would like to think I've been able to share the journey with others with whom I'm in contact as students, workshop participants, and fellow activists more generally. Thank you. We still have about half an hour. Oh, there's somebody already in Q&A. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that's Diego Garcia.
Mas Dédé, thank you so much for taking us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Incredibly fascinating combination of your personal life and activist life as well. A couple of people submitted some questions over email already, but I'll save them for a little bit later, just to open the floor to our current audience. And I think that Irmia Fitria already
my former student, Mia.
Can you see the question? Can you all see
yes,
the question?
Yes, I can read it. This is about USAID. Yes, USAID. Mia has worked under USAID project a couple of times, and USAID does support diverse gender and sexuality. So it's not. I could share also. I'm not taking up the consultancy, but USAID Dili is doing an assessment. Actually, if you're interested, you could email me and I'll forward it to them. If they haven't found a consultant, to assess the possibility of including gender sexual diversity in all development programs, all American funded development programs in Timor-Leste. Yeah. However, in the practice, many projects, unfortunately, the project I was involved, refused to work with non-binary, mainly because the gender policy in Indonesia only accommodated women. Yeah, so it's the Indonesian side that kind of, would reject. I think in Timor-Leste it will be better. We need to learn from ours, our small neighbor. And Saskia, I don't know if how to pronounce. Saskia Latievaria. I'm a 20-year-old genderqueer Indonesian. Currently residing in San Francisco. I want to connect with the LGBT community in Indonesia. Where do I start? Go to the Gaya Nusantara website or follow us on Instagram. And just send us a direct message there. And there is no Indonesian LGBTIQ group in San Francisco. I know there's one in the New York area called Satu Pelangi, and they march in the New York Pride to the consternation of the Indonesian Consulate General. Oops, they refuse to lend props. That's how petty they can be. But yeah, Saskia, do follow us, and maybe the Satu Pelangi people know people in the Bay Area. Yeah, thank you.
If I may cut in, Saskia, I will post the Gaya Nusantara Instagram site, Facebook site, all those things in the chat box, so you have a way of connecting.
Yeah, if you go to the website, all the account names, are there. And actually, just Google Gaya Nusantara, you'll probably find all of them. Gaya Nusantara, yeah. Oh, there's another question. Should I read this? Oh, it's actually the one from Saskia, yeah, which I have answered. See, there's somebody from the Bay Area. Oh, there's another one. Ross Feenan. Thank you so much for presenting. Thank you. You're welcome. There are plenty of us gay Western people who travel to Bali and have Indonesian partners. How could we also lend our voice to bring about more awareness and or be involved in the movement? Well, Bali has a few groups. There is Gaya Dewata, which was set up in 1992 as a result of an HIV project that was funded by the Ford Foundation, one of the first at the time. So Google Gaya Dewata and get in touch with them. There is also Kapelata. There's also Queer Language Club, Bali. And I think it's safe to share it here. They are preparing a Pride event. Of course, it will be hidden in some woods or some cafe in Ubud or something. But hey, yeah. And there is an inclusive warung cafe, I think in Canggu, if you know Bali, on the south, in southern Bali, and they employ people with disabilities and queer people as servers. It's owned by a gay couple, so you know these things are possible. Get in touch with them. There's also Bali Peduli, if you want to help, you know, which was actually set up by an American doctor, Steve Wicknell, who is now in Phnom Penh, though. But Steve actually with a few Balinese friends or Bali-based friends set up Bali Peduli, which is an amazing, you know, HIV service. What is it? NGO and clinic. I wish there was one in Surabaya. And it's practically free, and it's just basically so there are things happening in Bali. Yeah, if you get, and Bali Medica is another one that was, I think it was also set up by Steve Wicknell, but then it has become independent now. So that's it, Ross. I hope that helps. So next time you come to Bali, you could get it. Oh, Mas Joe. Very glad. Yeah, I know. We haven't met each other for probably 30 years at least. With gay academic Indonesian students from the West. Well, there's Tom Belstorff, of course, and there is now Ben Hegarty at, he is now at University of New South Wales as a postdoc fellow. Yes, we are in touch with one another. Diego Garcia is another one. He's Spanish, but now based in Brighton. Yeah, if you know people who are not in touch with us, please refer them to us or us to them. Yeah, that will be very useful. Yeah. How did COVID affect the Waria community in Surabaya? Not so good, but we have to actually, salute the Waria in Surabaya, in Yogyakarta. Sylvia, you're going to be in Yogyakarta. They actually were they were at the forefront of, working on COVID and of course HIV before. And they also help people who are non-queer people. So they're not picky about who to help. So yeah, it's there is a report. Diego actually wrote it. I can't remember, but it's published. But it was actually done under the auspices of the Westminster Democracy Foundation. And it's actually the impact of COVID on LGBTIQ communities in Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and Uganda, I think, or Nigeria, one of the African countries. And it's showing that people don't just sit around; people do help each other. And Jogja is amazing. There are two Waria or trans women crisis center, and they do welcome non-Waria people, although the gay men usually stay away from them, unfortunately, transphobic. Okay, thanks, Mas Joe. Hope to see you again soon. There it is. Mia actually has a video. about Perwakos working on COVID-19 with the Regional Disaster Management Agency. So there you go. Yeah, Mia is an expert on, disaster management, including, with queer communities. Okay. Anything else? We still have about 20 minutes.
Shall I ask one of the questions that were emailed?
Why not? Yeah, from the email, yeah.
Okay, and I will put this in the chat box as well, so everybody can read the question.
Okay. Yes.
And this was a question posed by John Israel. I'm not quite sure where John Israel is located, or if you happen to know him already. The question is, Indonesia has recently outlawed premarital heterosexual relations. Does that apply to non-heterosexual relations as well?
That's worth at least a paper in the law school. I have checked with law professors that I know quite well, and they disagree with each other. Actually, I checked with two. I should have checked with more, probably. One of them, who's I would call a literalist, says that if you read the text, it's only heterosexual people, couples, who are outlawed, and only when reported by close relatives, direct relatives, meaning parents, adult children, and siblings. So, but already the law has not been implemented yet. I mean, it will come into but already, things are not looking well. Yeah, I mean, this is probably an anecdotal case, but we can't be academic about this. In the city of Purworejo in central Java, probably a city of about 100,000 people, police got wind that one cheap love hotel is used by gay couples. So they raided one couple, of course, confiscated their mobile phones, and they got all the addresses, and they actually call each of the addresses and trace them and test them for HIV and announce them in the media. And I actually helped Steve Wicknell, the American that I mentioned earlier, to get in touch with Ministry of Health, with UNAIDS. They couldn't do anything, and the local activists were too scared, or not. There's no group on site, and the closest group was in Yogyakarta. They couldn't do anything. It was too much. So so that's one. The other interpretation is that, well, you never know who was going to report you. It could already, there's a good study by the Asia Pacific Transgender Network on conversion therapy, but only on trans people. It's ugly, I must say. I mean, if you have to go through it, the mildest is actually they'll douse you in cold water, and then probably spit on you and read some. I mean, this is the Muslim type. And read a few mantras, whatever, verses to you. And if you're unlucky, they even beat you up. And if you're unlucky in Aceh, they'll whip you, they'll cane you. And so things are not looking good. But, as I always say, I don't know what you think, people, when I say to the other activists, we can sit down and cry and scream, and but we got to do something. And in the long run, we believe in that our work with faith leaders is one of the strategies. And actually, there's a new book, unfortunately it's only in Indonesian, called Queer Menafsir. So queer interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith and the Fiqh, written by a queer Muslim person from Central Java, from Kendal. I'm hoping that he's a trans man, by the way. Amar, one of these days, Sylvia, you should invite Amar. He speaks good English, and he actually got his master's from the University of Birmingham in gender and queer theology or something like that. But I think this should be translated into English, and then because it's amazing, the effect on other queer Muslims is just amazing. Yeah, but basically, if we are literalists, like my first law professor friend, then we can be we can relax. I mean, as queer people, but we are already facing all these persecutions. I mean, every time we do an event like last night, I mean, we were combining all kinds of ammunition for the haters to attack us. It was carried out by a queer organization. The poet was the daughter of a communist from the 60s, Suchan Marching. Some of you know her. And it was that we always ready that it might be attacked, but well, fortunately we were not. So you never know. You hope for the best. And at the recent Sydney World Pride Human Rights Conference, somebody, I can't remember who, an Australian, mentioned the famous concept from Vladimir Lenin, revolutionary patience. You got to be revolutionary, but you got to have the patience. And actually, like Lenin, you might not see the result of your work. Yeah, so join us on the long journey. But it's everywhere. In the US, trans people are being targeted right and left. It's people here don't understand, because here people are at least tolerant.
Your community. How is all of this viewed in Indonesia, and also among you and your friends?
Why are they doing that? I thought the United States were, because they saw that the US has a special envoy on advancing the human rights of LGBTIQ plus people. Although when she was about to visit, somebody, I think in State Department, naively posted the news. Oh, all hell broke loose. And she did not get a visa, and the US ambassador was called in by the foreign ministry, and they had to save faces, like in many Asian countries. Poor Jessica, I happen to know her, Jessica Stern, couldn't visit. The British Embassy flew the rainbow flag for Pride Month last year. Oops. Oh, the ambassador was called in to the foreign ministry. But we don't give up. By the way, today is Wednesday. So yesterday, the Indian Supreme Court started deliberations. I'm sorry if my legal language is not proper. Deliberating over the petition of, I think, six queer couples for marriage equality. So India might be next. The government says no, but hey. Oh, is this an article?
Oh, no, this is a question from somebody in the audience.
Oh, sorry.
Also posted in the, which is about.
Oh, yeah. What role do you think the existence of spaces for queer nations to convene has played in terms of building and furthering the movement? Who do you think are the biggest opponents of queer? Okay, very good question. This is what I learned. I don't know, if Sylvia, Mas Joe, and the other Indonesianists in the webinar, what you think. We should look at Indonesia, not as a unified entity. So queer spaces still exist, even in Aceh. Believe it or not. And you are safer if your family joined the Free Aceh movement in the 90s and the 80s. And it's still possible, but they're under attack and they have to be rely really low. So but in other places it's possible. West Sumatra and West Java and Jakarta, believe it or not, they're getting worse. But I have to mention Eastern Indonesia. Ternate, Ambon, and Kupang, your city, Sylvia, may have a diversity protection local ordinance. So a bunch of people are working with the government there. At least they are welcome. If somebody like me goes to parliament, they are afraid to be photographed with me because they might lose in next year's election. So yeah, so who are the biggest opponents? I would say you see, it's hard. It's hard, almost academic only, to separate the politicians from the clerics, especially in political Islam. So it's actually political Islam. And just like the trans issue used in the United States, the so-called LGBT issue in Indonesia is a political football. And it's used to draw attention away from the real problems: corruption, environmental degradation, nepotism. The president's second son is running to be mayor of Depok, the city south of Jakarta. So, I mean, even the Suharto family was not that bad, but I don't know. But as I said, there's no use, crying and commiserating or whatever. Just do something. And what we do is, with our partner in Jakarta, the Community Legal Aid Foundation, we're working on those 3 ordinances. Hopefully, the governor of NTT, Sylvia, is willing to sit down with queer activists in Kupang. That's the governor. Now, my governor in East Java is homophobic. At one point, she was quoted that we should boil LGBT people, meaning, put it in herbal concoction and something like that. Conversion therapy, basically. So there's something from Dédé Sophronis. I hope I pronounced that name right. Thank you so much. You're welcome. I'm a fellow Chinese Indonesian, currently in Virginia. Wow. I'm also an early stage academician and activist. However, I haven't found the opportunity to bridge the two in my work. When I teach my students, often I feel separate from my own writing that revolve around Indonesia's socio-political climate. What was your reaction when you first tried to bridge your academic work and activity? Okay, I was lucky. I mean, I had my mentors. Professor Anderson, Ben Anderson was one of my mentors. But there were others that I, because of the space limitation and dimension. There was Adi Sukadana, who was a maverick, to say the least, at Erlangga, the university that I joined in 1984. He was a very supportive ally. I think he's, okay, I can say it here. He's queer himself, and in many ways, now we can call it that. But immediately, people heard that I joined the faculty in 1984. And by the third month or so, I was supervising undergraduate theses on waria, on homosexuality, on lesbians. And the students heard about me. I didn't come out in class, really, but I came out in the media. So, so it was possible. Just mention in the Indonesian context, Jadi, I mean, if you are identified by your students as, oh, this professor is safe. So I had people who were sons and daughters of political prisoners, or Timor-Leste activists. They would quietly go into my desk. We didn't have a room. I mean, we have a room, but my desk, and quietly actually mention, Pa, can you get us from the Cornell Library these photocopies from these articles we need for the movement? So, in a small way, it was nice. So my experience is that it's still possible until now. Next semester, actually, I'm starting an introduction to sexuality course at this elite private university. I'm a bit nervous about doing it with these rich families' kids, but hey, they have sex too, no? Or at least they will have. And they need to know. And the dean actually said, oh, sure. As long as we got 15 students, we'll go. We'll see. and come August whether that's going to happen. So it's still happening, and there are many others. I mean, if you email Gaya Nusantara or email me, I'll put you in touch with Indonesians who are PhD students in the US. At Northwestern, I know there are two. I'm not sure if one is queer, but one is certainly. And he's doing a study in Indonesia for his PhD. He's working with Jeff Winters at Northwestern. So things are moving. Do whatever little bit you can do. It's useful. We got 5 minutes.
Then perhaps I'll quickly, I have a list of questions, but I hope I can trouble you with them some other time. But I just thought I would ask.
By the way, Sylvia, if people want to email me or send me a message on Instagram or on Twitter or something, if they're very long, it will take time. But if they're short questions, I'll be happy to actually do a one-on-one Zoom interview. It's part of my work. So go ahead, Sylvia.
It's very generous. I wanted to talk about books. I recognize the feeling of enjoying spending time in libraries, and you
yes.
asked if the libraries here at the University of Virginia are also open until midnight. Well, our biggest library is under construction. I think one of the things they're doing is taking books away out of the library because apparently nobody reads books anymore. But I can imagine you browsing the shelves and then seeing the way that one does in the library, seeing books of a similar theme and topic right next to each other or on similar shelves, and you can go from this book to that book to that book. Yes. But before that, you came across information about homosexuality, being gay through I think the Liberty magazine, and books
Liberty magazine
found here and there. And these books and readings, some were somewhat supportive, not entirely dismissive. But what if you would have, and others were seemingly neutral in tone, the variety of human and non-human sexuality, something along those lines. And this, I can imagine, was in a sense, gave you a relief, may have been encouraging. What if you would have encountered different readings? I'm a big fan of people encountering all sorts of readings because people, I think, recognize themselves and things. What if you would have encountered different readings or a different kind of psychologist in your earlier formative years?
I think if the psychologist did nasty things to me, I would stop. I would have stopped seeing him. Number one, I mean, as much as I'm a nerdy, bookish, homebound person, I wasn't stupid. So that's one. I always believe that, even maybe the first article in Liberty that I read was negative. But I could actually read between the lines or read through the negativity and see at least, it has a name. That's a start, no? It has a name. And people are still discovering that, and these days, of course, there's so much to read, right? On the internet, maybe not books. And, I don't want to believe, maybe I'm wrong, that people don't read books anymore. Some people still do. And it's amazing the number of books published in Indonesia. I mean, my book buying budget, has actually expanded or whatever, because people are publishing poetry, novels, short stories. There is even a queer feminist horror stories called Lilith's Bible. Unfortunately in Indonesian, but if you want to learn Indonesian, read it. It's so I don't know. I mean, it's I'm trying to think, if I mean, whenever I started when I started doing peer counseling, I found that not everyone's family was so respected science. Just to show an HIV pamphlet in the family could get you disowned. No, seriously. Some people, I mean, Indonesia had those families. Not all families in Indonesia are nice. But the other day I was sitting with a waria, with a trans woman activist, about a few years younger than I am, and we looked at each other. She's Bugis, well, half Bugis, half Javanese. She was member of parliament at one point in the district of Bone in the 70s, believe it or not, in drag, in full drag. And we look at each other. I call her Mba, right? Sister, are we not survivors? Here we are in our 60s, and we're still around. We're still doing things. The context of that interview conversation was we were making a Bay Area based friend of mine, Bob Ostertag, is actually making a movie about her in collaboration with a Jogja based Indonesian filmmaker Novi, a good ally. Yeah, so I don't know, it's almost impossible to answer, but I'd read between the lines. Or I don't know, I mean, maybe I'll learn from the community. And actually, you know, this is something that I could share also, just personal. When I came out, the family started telling me, oh yeah, remember great uncle so-and-so who used to stop in Pasuruan on their way to Bali with these handsome boys? He's like you. And then even my aunt's maid said, oh, Mas, you know, brother, we had plenty of people like you in my village. And actually the head of our ward in Pasuruan never married. And my father said, you know, he's gay. So, you know, there will be from lived experience. Not everybody is nerdy, not everybody is bookish. I mean, my approach to things is through knowledge production, knowledge attestation. Other people through bravery, through law. I'm happy to share with you there are about 20 now openly queer legal practitioners, lawyers, lesbians. I think 2 trans women.
Julia?
Julia.
That's not for another time.
Anyway, the one that I actually remember who's getting a PhD in law is Agustin in Jakarta. Yeah, and you know, and we're gaining allies as well. So things are moving. There are quite a number of queer people who are getting PhDs, and you know, I mean, you know, that's my strategy, right? But one gay friend is running for parliament in next year's election. That's the only one I know, and we are supporting him. He still has to be screened by the party, the Partai Solidaritas Indonesia. Well, Mia wants to say something, I think. Raised hands, but oh, I don't see. Mia, you want to say something? I see. It doesn't matter. I mean, Mia, we can always, you know, talk on WhatsApp. Yeah, but that's my a bit lengthy answer. Yeah.
And it wouldn't surprise me at all if some of these people who are now openly gay or openly queer, openly lesbian, pursuing law degrees or public office positions, I can imagine that some of them wouldn't have done that without you doing what you have done.
Oh, I don't know. I was lucky to be the first. Although, you know, I followed the Wadam, the trans women.
Yeah.
So I always recognize that they're our elder sisters.
Yes.
Who, not like Stonewall, you know, in a rebellious way, but in terms of ideas and action, they were rebellious. And actually, in Ben Hegarty's book, if you read it, there were always people who are, you know, who have their heart in the right place or have their mind in the right place. In 1961, the Municipal Parliament of Jakarta was already drafting a bill to help trans people. You should show it to your American politicians who are trying to, you know, this anti-trans legislation.
That's another thing. You have been an example for many people in Indonesia, but also talks like this, and also all of your opinion pieces that you write, and also that newspapers like the New York Times are profiling you like they did a couple of years ago.
Well, I have to thank the media people.
But this shows.
Well, I know my words, and I must thank the Gay and Lesbian Alliance for Against Defamation, GLAD, in New York City. I mean, I was trained for 2 hours by GLAD about sound bites, and so I've learned to actually say the right things the right way to media. So yeah, it's useful. But you know, the Waria the Waria boarding school in Jogja, Islamic boarding school in Jogja, has also made it to the New York Times. Yeah, so you know,
But
as
for
I
so
said, we
many
do
young queer people
what
in
we
the
can
US
do.
who feel like
Sorry.
they're, for so many young queer people, LGBTQ,
Yeah,
it
oh,
matters
you
to
know,
see that there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with me.
yes,
Look at the
but
entire
also
world.
some of them become activists
Exactly.
and in their own right, and you know, and people always ask me, who is going to replace you? Nobody. They will have their own, you know, their own it's their own world, their own situations. You know, I once met a former communist who actually her husband was actually shot in front of her. She was pregnant in jail in 1948. You know, pretty ugly, right? But and she could not go home after 1965. This is Miss Francisca Fangidai, who had passed away. But I asked her, you know, in 1948 you were bashed by the right wing in Indonesia, but in 1955 you were number 4 in the election. How did you do it? And I was so proud. She called me comrade. Comrade, this is your struggle. That was ours in the 40s. You do it now and here. I mean, in Indonesia. Yeah. So it's, you know, to the young people, I was just that, you know, it's your world, it's your future. You have many years ahead of you, and if I can help, sure, I'll help. And we're still doing things. It's exciting, actually. Yeah.
And it is exciting for all of us here as well. So I'll bring today's conversation and talk to a close, again, by expressing my immense gratitude for sitting with us virtually. And I'm happy that this is possible in the age of Zoom. One good thing that came out of the pandemic. So for everybody who is here and who would still like to ask a question, yeah, your email address and Instagram handle are quite easy to find through Google. So
Yeah,
I suggest
just type in my name, you'll find many details about me.
So I propose that all of you who still have some burning questions after this, feel free to send Mas Dédé an email or a message.
Welcome.
And of course, it's up to you.
If I take too long, just remind me. Just resend it.